What makes a country a democracy? It feels like a simple question, right? I mean, it's kind of just something you know when you see. There's voting, probably political parties that change hands over the government every few years, usually after an election. Hopefully there's enshrined rights to speech, press, religion, freedom. But what actually makes a democracy? Well, like most labels and categories that us humans invent, it's not an exact science. No two self-styled democratic societies are going to look exactly the same. Oxford Languages defines a democracy as a system of government by the whole population or all eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. And while it is right, most countries that we consider democracies today are representative democracies, it's that first half of the definition that I actually find more useful, as I think a democracy is more of an ideal than it is a defined political system. As the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, famously put it, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Speaking of the United States, as one of the first examples of what we consider a representative democracy in the modern sense on a truly national scale, and as the most powerful country in all of human history, the U.S. has played a central role in shaping our idea of what a democratic society should look like, often using its self-ordained label as the global defender of freedom to decide which governments stand and which governments fall. But, as we know, with great power comes great responsibility. So, as millions find their lives under the dictate of the wills of Washington, we have to ask ourselves the big question. Is the U.S. even a democracy? Has it ever been? First, the basics. As any fourth grade American social studies teacher will tell you, the United States government is split into three branches. The executive, headed by the president, the legislative, split between the lower House of Representatives and the upper Senate, and a ostensibly independent and apolitical judiciary. Sorry, I couldn't say that with a straight face. Each has their own lists of responsibilities and checks and balances on one another that we aren't going to get into here. Just look it up. There's probably like a billion different videos explaining them. Most important for our story today is the executive and the legislative, as these are the elected organs of the U.S. government. Representatives of the people, elected by all voting-age Americans on the district, state, and national level. But, as our fictional fourth grade social studies teacher will also tell you, this all voting-aged American stipulation has not always been the case, and still isn't today, but we'll get into that later. Now, in the times of George Washington and the first few decades of the nation's existence, the only folks most states allowed to vote were white men with land. In 1928, Maryland became the last state to allow Jewish men to as well, and by the 1840s, this had mostly expanded to all white men, regardless of land ownership. One bloody American Civil War later, and the 15th Amendment granted all men, regardless of race, the right to vote, including blacks who had previously spent centuries as slaves, mostly in the American South. In reality, however, Jim Crow and similar restrictive laws prevented many blacks and even poor whites from exercising this right. The 19th Amendment in 1920 gave women the right to vote, 150 years after the country's founding and 67 years after Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Then, finally, after failing to suppress the civil rights movement, the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964, and every single United States adult was given the right to vote. So true democracy and freedom was finally achieved, a government made of, by, and for the people. Except for convicted felons in many states and anyone living in American overseas territories as far as presidential and Senate elections are concerned anyway. But other than that, everyone's vote matters. Right? Right? Let's talk about the Electoral College. As most Americans know, the U.S. does not directly elect its highest office, the president, but rather each state is allotted a number of electors, equal to its number of representatives in the House and Senate. Whichever presidential candidate wins a state, or the District of Columbia, wins all of a state's, or the District of Columbia's, electors, with two exceptions, thank you, Maine and Nebraska. This system creates a few major issues that limit its democraticness. Most often you'll hear people ragging on the fact that it is possible for the winner of the presidential election to not be the winner of the popular vote, which has been the case for the first victory of 2 out of our 4 presidents in the 21st century. People also often criticize the fact that due to each state being guaranteed at least 3 electors, the votes of people living in smaller states count a whole heck of a lot more than people living in larger states, allowing for a theoretical presidential victory with less than 25% of the vote. But in my personal opinion, the most undemocratic result of this electoral college system is that due to its winner-takes-all nature, the votes of many Americans, even with the legal right to, are completely worthless. Ask any blue voter in a red state or red voter in a blue state, and they will tell you, you may as well not vote at all. And many don't. In 2024, over 35% of eligible voters in the U.S. did not vote. Those are abysmal numbers. Additionally, due to Election Day not being a federal holiday, many poor, especially rural poor and usually black potential voters still can't. But hey, those are all just temporary kinks that'll be all worked out in time as the unstoppable march of progress continues to ensure everyone who lives under these stars and stripes has the ability to choose which party represents them. Let's talk about those political parties. I mean, that is probably the most important part of a democracy, right? Being able to choose who represents you, which in the US for over a century has usually been a choice between one of 2 parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, a left-wing party and a right-wing party. 2 organizations that represent different and unique political ideas and interests, right? I mean, that's certainly what the vast majority of our media says, isn't it? These are the battle lines that are drawn every 4 years of a culture war for the future of this country. I mean, just look. Mass deportations, tax cuts for the rich, stagnant wages, authoritarian reforms, imperialist wars. Look, I'm not trying to say that these 2 parties are exactly the same. Their rhetoric definitely changes. I mean, the MAGA movement in particular has had a tangible effect on the culture of this country in a way that has left its most vulnerable populations feeling the least safe in years. And President Trump has been the most brazen in decades in his war against freedom and human dignity. But his war is not a new one. It's been waged gradually for decades by both Democrats and Republicans, both serving the same corporate interests that fund their campaigns and the same economic system that keeps them in power. The very fact the Democrats are labeled a left-wing party at all is political gaslighting on a national scale, made more offensive by the fact that the United States government has undermined and suppressed every genuine left-wing movement in the country, all the way to the point of outright violence and assassination. Moreover, the first-past-the-post, winner-takes-all style elections the U.S. uses discourages the average voter from voting for any other party than the main 2 if they want their vote to actually count for anything. Most don't even bother learning about so-called third parties, with corporate media keeping them from doing so even by accident. So while some countries will maintain their economic and political systems through one-party rule, America maintains it through uniparty rule. Two parties that fundamentally serve the same interests and have historically differed very little. Now, if you're an American watching this, you might be thinking something along the lines of, it doesn't feel like I'm living in a dictatorship. And yeah, I mean, I would never try to claim that living in the United States is the same as living in the more overtly repressive regimes that exist around the world, but I need you to understand something crucial. And this goes for any Europeans watching this as well. Our lives are better and freer, not because our governments are nicer, but because we are wealthier. Stick with me here. Since the Second World War, the United States has had one resource more vital than any other. A resource so crucial to its success that it single-handedly created the American Golden Age. No, not oil, or steel, or any material for that matter. So what is it? It's population. In 1945, around half of all global manufactured goods were made in the United States' industrial juggernaut. It led the world in innovation and sciences, and its consumers spent more money than any other population on Earth. And so, the famous American middle class was born. The US had a real economic incentive to keep its population wealthy and educated. And a wealthy, educated population is much, much harder to suppress than a poor and ignorant one. But this tide has been shifting. As wealth continues to accumulate at the very top of American society, as new methods of production make human labor less and less necessary, and as Americans become less educated by the day, the economic relevance of the average American is only decreasing. And as economic relevance decreases, so does political relevance. As economics and politics are not separate. They are one and the same. The wealth which has entirely been created by the working people of this country, from the factory worker to the doctor to the janitor, is being siphoned into the hands of a very few, just by the virtue of them owning the factories, workplaces, and capital, and having a government which is willing to enforce this ownership. In this way, authoritarian economics necessitates authoritarian governance. And it will only necessitate it more as economic tensions grow. There's one more thing that we have to cover today, though, as that claim that I made, that the wealth of America was entirely created by the American working people, it's not exactly accurate. At all, actually. Up to this point, we have been discussing only the relationship between American citizens and their government. Those people who at least theoretically have the right to vote in American elections. But the United States' influence stretches far beyond the confines of its borders. It's time to talk about American empire. Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Francisco Maduro. You may have never heard of these three men before, but they all share two things in common. They were all heads of state of their respective countries, and all of them were overthrown with help from the United States of America. And in all three countries, what followed were decades of civil unrest and dictatorship. In the Congo, Mobutu took Lumumba's place, and he would maintain control through torture and civilian slaughter. In the First and Second Congo Wars, which would ignite in the aftermath of his downfall, over 20 million lives would be lost. And in Mexico, the Mexican Revolution would spiral into a nationwide civil war. 2 million people would lose their lives. The Mexican government would never fully reassert control over the country, setting the stage for the rise of the cartels. Speaking of the US creating its own problems, Iran. The US overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh to protect Western control over the country's oil and its installment of Shah Pahlavi created the environment of corruption and repression that would lead to the Islamic Revolution, birthing the very same regime it now seeks to destroy. And we could go on. Korea, Vietnam, Nicaragua, Iraq, time and time again, the United States has exerted its will on the global stage, and each time it has left millions of graves in its wake. And always, U.S. businesses follow close behind. For you see, it is in Africa, South America, South Asia that our devices are manufactured, our stones, gems, and rare materials are mined and refined, and many of our crops are grown. And yet, the wealth created is funneled into those same hands that run our politics and economy. In Africa, the richest continent in terms of resources, millions lose their lives to starvation each year. This is despite the fact that we live in what should be a post-food scarcity world, should we decide to distribute just a little more efficiently. And it is these places that will bear the brunt of increasing ecological collapse, though its effects will sooner or later be felt by everyone. I don't recall voting for that. Do you? This is not democracy. This is not freedom. This is empire, oligarchy, and mass destruction. And if we ever want things to change, we need to take real action to bring change about. No, that doesn't just mean getting people like this into office, or even people like this. We need to go beyond simply voting in elections, and as conditions continue to worsen both globally and here in the States, we need to learn what real political action looks like. And so, to start the conversation, I would like to present my 3 biggest first steps to becoming a genuine force for real change. Step 1, educate. As we've discussed, an uneducated population is a weak population. Education is perhaps one of the most powerful tools in the arsenal in the battle against oppression and propaganda. Learn often. Ask questions and seek answers. Explore all different fields of study, from mathematics to science to history and politics. Most importantly, though, seek different worldviews. And no, that doesn't just mean, one liberal source and one conservative source. No, I mean people who have lived different lives than you, have different experiences, people who look different and sound different and live differently. If you're getting all of your information from folks who look just like me, it's time to diversify. Step 2. Grassroots organization. This means seeking out in-person organization opportunities, whether that be explicitly political groups or just volunteer organizations. Hell, throwing a party or a community event can be a form of organization. Talking to your neighbor, making a friend. In a system that wants us divided and scared, community is vital. And step 3, international solidarity. If there is one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's that your problems are inextricably linked to the woes of other human beings on this planet. What can be done to others can and will be done to you. Nobody is free until everyone is free. So don't let your activism and political agitation stop at just concessions for those living in your home country, especially if your home country is actively benefiting from imperialism. Our empathy and solidarity are our greatest strengths and the biggest threat to the power of those who want to divide and conquer. And finally, and unofficially, take care of yourself. Because not only do you deserve kindness and love from yourself just by the virtue of being human and yourself, building your own strength only makes supporting others easier. Those in power want you scared and weak and disheartened. Fighting back against that is not simply self-care. It's self-revolution. I'm James D. Thank you for watching.